Assalamualaikum and good greetings. So today I'll be watching a video titled The Four Gospels and Introduction. This is a video by Blogging Theology. So I just watched his short video on whether or was the Quran copied from the Bible. And I think his presentation is quite interesting. It's quite straightforward, and so I hope to understand more about the Gospels. I have been interacting with many Christians, I think, and maybe you are one of them, including in the comment sections, and we have, share information, understanding, etc. So what I realize is I do not really have any foundation of what's going on, what is in the Bible, etc., except for just a very rough idea, right? This will be about the four Gospels, so I hope to understand more. Without further ado, let's watch.
In this video, I just want to talk about the four Christian Gospels, the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but particularly introduce to you how scholars, how the academics understand these Gospels. Just a brief summary for you. So I'm going to be following the mainstream view of biblical scholars in the universities in the West, be it in the United States, Canada, Europe, Britain, Germany, France, etc. I'm going to give the standard view just for your information. I'm going to give you an at-a-glance chronological and thematic summary of these four Gospels according to New Testament scholarship. The first Gospel is the Gospel of Matthew. This was written, they say, around 80 to 85 AD. The author is unknown. I know it says the Gospel of Matthew, but in fact the Gospel doesn't claim to be by anyone in particular. No named individual is attached to the Gospel if you read the text itself. Matthew, though, and we'll call him that for the sake of convenience, used the Gospel of Mark when he composed his own Gospel. And Q, this is the first letter Q of the word quell, which is a German word meaning source. So Matthew used a source, Q, and other material unique to Matthew. Matthew portrays Jesus as the new Moses, who gives his disciples the true interpretation of the Mosaic law and expects his disciples to keep it. The Mosaic law is the 613 commandments of the law given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And Jesus' disciples in the kingdom of God are expected to keep this law with renewed intensity. As it says in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, "Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments of the law and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." So in profound contrast to the churches today and to the teaching of Paul, Jesus in Matthew expects his disciples, his followers, to keep the Jewish law. In other words, to be good Jews, actually. And this then is the first book of the New Testament.
So not that new information in the sense that what Jesus called for, right? Of course, I haven't heard in the chronological order in this sense, in terms of based on the Gospels, what is the idea all about. But if I'm not mistaken, it says that this it is based on two sources, right? Did I get it correct? One is from Q, another one is from, is it another Gospel? Because then how is it chronologically first? Or is just the first in arrangement in the Bible? Or is first in the timeline? Someone who understands that can please explain.
The Gospel of Mark was written around the year 65 to 70 in the first century. It is anonymous, of course, as all the Gospels, written by a Greek-speaking Christian. The writer portrays Jesus as completely misunderstood by nearly everybody he encounters. How different from Matthew, by the way, where the disciples are almost model disciples of Jesus. This, the Gospel of Mark, is the first to be written of the four. The resurrection
Okay, so in terms of when it is written, this is the first, because if Matthew, is it the first one that refers to Mark? Is it? Did I get it correctly? So Mark is the first one to be written, is it?
Action narrative in chapter 16 of the Gospel of Mark is not found in the earliest and best manuscripts, though it is still included in virtually all modern Bibles that I'm aware of. It's interesting, the earliest Gospel does not contain any resurrection appearances. The Gospel of Luke was written around 80 to 85 AD, probably by a Greek-speaking Christian and companion of Paul. He also uses Mark and Q and other sources to compile his gospel. Jesus in Luke is portrayed as a prophet, and his teaching about God, salvation, and sin is very similar to the prophets of the Jewish Bible and very similar to that of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Unlike Mark, and this is a really important point, I think, Luke does not share the view that Jesus' death was an atoning sacrifice for sin. Mark's striking statement in Mark's Gospel, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many, which is in Mark 10:45, is deleted by Luke, who clearly rejects such a view, perhaps in abhorrence to the idea of human sacrifice. Any verses that suggest such an understanding in Mark are removed by Luke, and Jesus instead dies a righteous martyr, rejected by God's people. For Luke, simple repentance to God will bring forgiveness of sins. And there are many parables in Luke that tell this. And I suggest you look for a great story in Luke chapter 15, the parable of the prodigal son, very famous story which illustrates this point. The last gospel is the Gospel of John. This is written about 90-95 AD. It's the last of the canonical gospels to be written. Traditionally, it was believed to be by John, the son of Zebedee. This is the disciple of Jesus. But nearly all scholars today doubt this, for good historical reasons, which I won't go into. In many ways, it is quite different to the synoptic Gospels. That's the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In John, Jesus is portrayed as the pre-existent divine Son who utters the famous I am sayings, unique to the Gospel. So, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the resurrection and the life. It goes on and on. I am this, I am, I am. They're only found in one gospel, the very last to be written, the Gospel of John. They're unique to this gospel.
That is interesting, because I think the depiction of Jesus that many of fellow Christian friends shared with me in the comment then seems to be in this format, right? Because I can remember reading the comment about I am, etc., right? Is it before Abraham, I am, something like that? So if it only come into the picture in this gospel, of course I'm not sure what that means yet, because I'm not a scholar, of course, and I haven't done enough research on it. But it is interesting if there's inconsistency in the depiction of Jesus at that core level, I think.
The vast majority of scholars, perhaps 99% of scholars, consider these sayings, however, to be the literary creation of the gospel writer. Let's repeat that. The vast majority of scholars consider these sayings, the I am sayings, to be the creation of the gospel writer. So Jesus, the historical Jesus, didn't say them according to the overwhelming consensus. The gospel has proved to be enormously influential, however, on Christian thought about Jesus, and provided the Christological foundation of the later church's creedal statements about Jesus, for example, at the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. It is still central to much evangelical preaching today. So that is a at a glance summary of the Gospels.
So, from the four Gospels, the authors is unknown, but only one is have some association with the assumption of, I think it's written by a certain John, but even though that is not scholarly accepted, if I understand correctly. That is an interesting thing in the sense that if we are familiar with the hadith tradition, right, the science of hadith in Islam, that would make the all four gospel as it definitely will not make it hadith sahih, right? Because if the author is unknown, who actually state this in terms of hadith, who actually narrate this hadith is unknown, then is simply not accepted as hadith, right? So it's not even da'if then, right? Because da'if you can still have that chain but some weakness somewhere, right? But if that is even the author is even unknown, then it doesn't even fit the hadith criteria, let alone the Quran, of course, which is interesting for a Muslim at least.
I'm now going to show you a bit of technical jargon here. It's called the two-source hypothesis. So if you look at this, what this is trying to illustrate, and this again is broadly accepted by scholars, although there are one or two scholars who dissent from this, and of course it's not dogmatically asserted. This is the most plausible explanation of the relationship between the Gospels that we have that anyone's come up with. You're welcome to come up with a better one if you can think of it. So the idea is that Mark, as we see in purple there, feeds into or contributes to the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. And then next to Mark is Q, another source, the second source. Q is source in German. It's just how it's known in New Testament studies. So Q also is used by Matthew and Luke, and you can see the purple, no, I think it's blue, the blue feeding into Matthew and Luke. And if you look at Matthew and Luke, you see they have their own unique material. It's green in Matthew, which is stuff unique to Matthew. And also Luke has material, sayings of Jesus, for example, which are unique to Luke. So this gives a kind of a graph illustration of what's called the two-source hypothesis. The two-source hypothesis proposes that the authors of Matthew and Luke drew on the Gospel of Mark and a hypothetical collection of sayings known of Jesus known as Q.
So where is John? Because there's three gospel there and a Q, right?
This collection could have been written, it could have been oral, we don't really know, it could have been both, a mixture of written and oral sources. We don't have the evidence for it independently of the Gospels, but the material in Q is found in both Matthew and Luke, and clearly looks like it's something they've both drawn on to write their own Gospels. So just to conclude, where did the idea come from then that the Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? Well, the earliest historical record we have of anyone calling the four Gospels, which are anonymous, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, is towards the end of the 2nd century in the writings of an early church father called Irenaeus. Irenaeus ended up being Bishop of Lyon in today's France, although he wasn't from there originally. And he refers to them as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And that's the earliest time they're ever called that. Interestingly, when these Gospels are quoted before then, as they are in people called the Apostolic Fathers, for example, Justin Martyr or Ignatius of Antioch, or the other people, they're never named as by Matthew, Mark, Luke or John. They're just simply quoted without any authorial reference at all. So as the titles are identical apart from the name, the Gospel according to, the Gospel according to, the Gospel according, clearly that's been added by a later church scribe to describe the contents. But today, virtually no one thinks that the apostles themselves wrote these Gospels. They were written in sophisticated Greek, a language that your average fisherman from Galilee would not have been able to speak to that level, and they couldn't read and write anyway. They were peasants, basically. So it's virtually impossible that they could have written it themselves. They wouldn't have had the education and the knowledge and the ability to write the four Gospels, which, as I say, are anonymous.
Okay, so I think that's the point that normally brought forward in the sense to say that those who write the Gospels are not those who are with Jesus Christ in his time, right? Because those people from a different language than those who write, the level of, I don't know, sophistication in the language, or maybe education in that aspect. Yeah, but again, I'm still wondering, because I wait for if John will come into the picture with Q mark, the four. I mean, how it links, right? Is John suddenly appears without any connection, because it isn't even included in that picture?
So they are considered to be second generation creations, not by first generation eyewitnesses. They come from the second generation. They're anonymous. And are they true? Are they historically reliable? Well, that's the question. Scholars disagree to the extent to which they are reliable or factual, and that they are fictional. But broadly, you can say, I think, if I can summarize scholarship, that the Synoptic Gospels contain more historically reliable material in than the Gospel of John. That is seen as the most fictionalized account of Jesus' life and teaching of all the four, which is why his historians, when they research the life of Jesus, go to Mark and Matthew and Luke, and tend not to go to John so much. Now, if you want to read this further, I do strongly recommend this book. There we go. The Historical Figure of Jesus by E.P. Saunders. E.P. Saunders, according to Professor Wayne Meeks, who's Professor of Biblical Studies at Yale University, this book is superb. The Historical Figure of Jesus stands out by its clarity and balance, its common sense, and above all, by its honesty. And that is, there are many recommendations on the back. E.P. Saunders himself is a very distinguished historian and specialist in this area, and this is a general book written for the general public to introduce them to the historical understanding of Jesus, as opposed to the Christ of faith in the church, because the two are not the same, and there are important differences. So if you want to take this further, please purchase this book. It's readily available online, and I hope that is of use. Till next time.
Okay, so that is very, very interesting to me, at least. Learn new things, a lot of new things, but I guess what was mentioned in the end about Gospel of John, that is the most fictional of all between the four, right? But I assume that is most relatable to the how Jesus is being viewed nowadays in the church. I'm making this assumption, but then again, in my comment section, many of you Christian friends have shared about your belief, etc., and I come to understand that Christian, those who identify as Christian from the Catholic background and Protestant, and some from Jehovah's Witness also commented, the core belief is not exactly the same, right? So from outside, from a Muslim perspective, when we say Christian, we generally just see the whole thing as Christian, right? But I think when I get to know better, among those who identify as Christian, actually have significant differences between you in terms of what you actually believe in Jesus, in how to say, heaven and hell, etc. as well, right? So good to know, good to understand, and good to learn more. Hopefully all of us day by day keep learning more, keep understanding, and communicate with more people, and with that, hopefully, inshallah, we understand people more, and I think that can only lead towards more positive outcome, right? So with that, thank you for watching. See you next time.